There's no denying that the 1933 Emperor Jones is a landmark film for American cinema. It was the first mainstream American movie to feature a black leading actor. It featured the iconic career-making performance by Paul Robeson as Emperor Jones and brought a leading black actor to white and black audiences alike on the silver screen. W.E.B. Du Bois hailed the original Eugene O'Neill play the film is based on as bursting through black stereotypes, and some reviewers reveled in the film's provocative and powerful portrayal of a black American man rising from a working class job in the United States to ruling the white and black denizens of a Caribbean island. But the film was also controversial in its day. The Emperor Jones was censored for white audiences, cutting out key scenes that showed Robeson demanding fealty from his white lackey, a colonialist played by Dudley Diggins. The film was also censored for black audiences, as the N-word was cut out of initial prints, rendering some scenes difficult to follow. Critics of the film took issue with some of its stock characters and situations, reminiscent of other unfair and stereotypical portrayals of black people in Hollywood at the time. Other critics found the language, both the frequent inclusion of the N-word and the overall invented and stylized dialogue of Eugene O'Neill's invention, problematic. Indeed, Paul Robeson himself felt reservations about the Emperor Jones. Before taking on the lead role in the play, Robeson critiqued the script's invented and stereotype-laden dialogue and portrayals of black men, saying, "You may know this kind of person, and Mr. O'Neill may know this kind of person, but I don't." And yet, after his successful run of performances with the original stage play and then his landmark performance in the 1933 film, it's clear that Robeson transcended the limitations of the time and text. He made it his own. Robeson's film performance elevated the actor above the confines of the film, and also used the film itself as a way to critique the flaws in his society's time, and use the levers of power in movie making to achieve change. This is something Robeson would continue to do his entire life. The film itself is an interesting expansion of the original Eugene O'Neill play. The original play is solely concerned with Brutus Jones's tyrannical rule over a small Caribbean island, his fall as a ruler, his hubris as a man. The film, directed by Dudley Murphy, establishes Brutus Jones's past in visual and cinematic detail, leverages Robeson's talents more widely than it had simply focused on island drama, and develops interesting motifs that add layers to Jones's final fall. It's not surprising that a film filled with the problematic jungle motifs of the time, exoticizing Caribbean and African experience through stock portrayals, begins with the imagery featuring supposed tribal people taking part in a dance. This dance is then juxtaposed to a black church service in the United States. The pastor and his partners in prayer are rallying behind Brutus Jones, at this time a young man on his way up in the world, and the congregation joins in praying for Jones's safe travel and success as he sets out for a new job as a Pullman porter. This is the first of many moments in the film that add visual and thematic heft to the original play, whether it is the church congregation, his fellow porters on a train, or coal shovelers on a steamboat, or the men he works with on a prison chain gang. Brutus Jones is frequently surrounded by communities, large and small, in the beginning of the film. Communities that provide him guidance, support, and intuition on the challenges of the day. These communities are geographically and mentally separated from Jones by the end of the film, as he stands alone, separated and singular in his doomed role of emperor. The film also does an interesting job of using shot composition and mise-en-scène to first foreshadow Jones's rise to power and then visually assert his dominance within the frame once he becomes emperor. In the first half of the film, even when Jones is working menial jobs or is shackled in a prison chain gang, director Dudley Murphy films Robeson's imposing frame and iconic face from below, lending him additional layers of power and gravity. Whether he's shoveling coal or bellowing out a song of lament in a rock yard in that quintessential Robeson voice, Robeson is presented as a monumental figure waiting to burst through the constraints of society. Once he enthrones himself on his Caribbean island, the viewer is already prepared for the grandeur of Jones's power. The trappings have changed. His garish outfit, his resplendent surroundings, but the angle remains the same. Jones, at least in his mind, and through Murphy's camera, has always been an emperor. The world is simply catching up to his designs. And in a film that is filled to the brim with rapidly changing locations, myriad set and costume changes, and sometimes overfilled, especially in the beginning of the film, with tangential characters that disappear from the narrative's main drama, this overstuffed quality, in many ways, is the perfect foil for the last sequence of the film. In the final lengthy scene of the Emperor Jones, Brutus wanders the jungle of his kingdom, terrified by this present peril, the ominous sound of drums and rebelling rebels, always on the periphery of his senses, and haunted by his past. This emotionally compelling sequence is all the more impressive for its minimalism and restraint. Though filled with multiple double exposures and dissolved fades, as phantoms appear and disappear around Jones, figments of his fevered mind, the sequence is truly just Robeson. Robeson thrashes through the jungle and physically embodies the mental turmoil at the root of the character, the film, and the historical and contemporary context that surround the Emperor Jones. Minutes stretch out as we watch Robeson embody bitterness, fear, rage, and a sense of entrapment that is as contradictory as it is darkly cathartic. Jones has created the particular peril he now faces, his own people rising up against him. Robeson's remarkable performance also embodies the true Greek tragedy element of the character. His failings, his own racist view of other black people on the island, his obsession with capitalistic and colonialist power, are both from within him and from without, products of his time and place. He is brought down by his own people because of his own actions, but he is ruined by his own world. As film critic Hilton Auls notes of the Emperor Jones, Paul Robeson, for all the bravura he brought to the film, quote, always stood outside the role, end quote. Robeson seemed to understand that, quote, O'Neill's fantastical overwrought language was an ill-fitting mask, is Auls notes. In the end, by inhabiting and deepening the Brutus Jones character in the film version, with all his flaws intact, Robeson showed, as Auls notes, that, quote, race itself is a mask, a prop used by the powerful, end quote, and those aspiring to a particular kind of power, to subjugate those without it. Indeed, Robeson used his first major role to expose the masks of capitalism and black exploitation embedded in the film's text, but also within the Hollywood industry itself. To his credit, O'Neill pushed to have Robeson the featured lead actor in the film's promotional material and marquee lettering. But Robeson also used his role as lead actor, a known bankable quantity in the entertainment industry, to push for policy change as well. Robeson ensured that all film production on The Emperor Jones was done above the Mason-Dixon line, outside the clutches of the Jim Crow South. This ensured that all economic activity generated by the film would go to the North, and not the South, a kind of economic boycotting of problematic states and policies that became more popular in the 1960s, and we are more used to seeing today. I think the question does need to be asked, though. Why is The Emperor Jones, this film with these particular problematic elements, the first mainstream American film to feature a black lead? What was mainstream then and now, and what was missed? Because while Jones in general and Robeson in particular are rightly held up as iconic pieces of American cinematic history, it isn't a complete picture. For one, the African-American director Oscar Micheaux had been making films for years prior to The Emperor Jones's release, some of which contained powerful narratives of black achievement and realistic depictions of black people, dating back to at least 1920 and Micheaux's landmark film, Within Our Gates. The 1930s alone saw the release of 17 Oscar Micheaux films, many of which provided a far wider and more complete view of black American life, the struggle of altruistic black Americans, as well as the potential for evil in others. Indeed, while The Emperor Jones is known as Robeson's first, quote, breakout role, one has to again critique the term breakout. Oscar Micheaux directed Robeson in what is considered Robeson's first film role in the 1925 silent psychological thriller Body and Soul. In it, Robeson plays a different kind of conman and tyrant, a small-town preacher who wins over the loyalty of the town in an attempt to bilk them of their resources. Robeson is big, charismatic, and his rendition of the diabolical Reverend T. Jones is the lifeblood of the film. In fact, Robeson is such a huge presence in Body and Soul that he has a second role in the film as the Reverend's identical twin brother Sylvester, a strange brother who falls in love with the film's protagonist Isabel. And it is with Sylvester and Isabel that we find the counterpoint to The Emperor Jones. A film starring a black man, featuring depictions of black American life, did not need to be filled with problematic language and cultural inaccuracies. The breakout role for a black actor did not have to be a crass misanthrope. And Oscar Micheaux's films, before and after The Emperor Jones, American moviegoers, that is, those who were able to see Micheaux's films, were exposed to a far wider cross-section of black American life, from the strong women protagonists that often filled his films and would remain missing from mainstream American cinema for decades. Add in the supporting roles that added human dynamics to Micheaux's films, to the darker and all-too-human elements within the black and all communities, and you had a very different stream of American thought and cinematic representation running parallel to The Emperor Jones's release. Indeed, with Body and Soul, Paul Robeson did both. Still, while The Emperor Jones may have been the final evolutionary step of Eugene O'Neill's play, from stage to film, the evolution of Paul Robeson was just beginning. As Hilton Als notes, Robeson used the role of Brutus Jones to create, quote, a credible document of an actor not trying to play black, but to be black, end quote, on screen. Robeson would go on to make 8 more feature films, including King Solomon's Mines, and would continue to perform throughout the country and around the world. But his marquee work as a performer was only part of his life's work. His push to move the Emperor Jones production north was only the first act in a life of political activism, in which Robeson used his position as a star and his talent as a performer to raise awareness of racial injustice in the United States, and economic injustice at home and abroad. Indeed, as World War II ended and anti-communist political attacks began, Robeson was targeted by the US government for especially harsh political reprisals. Towards the end of his life, Robeson was blacklisted in Hollywood and elsewhere, unable to work in the United States. At the same time, in a particularly ironic twist of fate, considering his breakout role was about a globe-trotting black man, Robeson's passport was revoked by the US State Department, so he could not perform overseas either. And yet Robeson continued to advocate and struggle. He continued to speak and sing and never surrendered. As the 1979 documentary Paul Robeson, Tribute to an Artist pointed out, while Robeson may have been known for a time as the trailblazing lead actor for The Emperor Jones, his sonorous voice was most liked and most linked to the song Old Man River. And yet that song also evolved under Robeson's careful management of his art and craft. The original song, written by white authors but sung by Robeson, also included multiple uses of the N-word, an inclusion that was revised to, quote, darkies, in a later version, though still problematic by today's audiences. But as Robeson continued to evolve as an artist and activist, so too did the song. In 1938, Robeson changed the passive lyrics, I get weary and sick of trying, I'm tired of living and scared of dying, to the more active and assertive. But I keep laughing instead of crying. I must keep fighting until I'm dying. Indeed, this revision would become a hallmark of Robeson's activist work, where his revision of Old Man River, and its fighting spirit, became a rallying cry for racial justice activists and worker solidarity movements around the world. And so I think it is within this larger context that we can more fully understand and appreciate The Emperor Jones as a film. While we sometimes look upon classic films as works stuck in time, solidified within the amber of their cultural moments, this was never the case with Robeson, or the roles he took on. Brutus Jones may have been a tragic product of his time, but Robeson refused to let that be the final word on the Black experience. Black power was not going to be, and would not be, contingent on the white-imposed fallacies of race. Hollywood's sense of mainstream art and mainstream politics would not restrain Robeson. Brutus Jones's racial ideology was flawed, and in many ways one of the roots of his undoing. But Robeson's fighting spirit to see himself as equal to those around him was reflected in his work on and off screen for decades to come.